Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part 2 of my conversation with David Hubert, Associate Provost for Learning Advancement at Salt Lake Community College. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. So let me ask you a question that I was actually recently, I went to the recent ABLE conference in July, and in one of the sessions that I attended, we talked a little bit about the one of the issues that we sometimes see, and that is the sustainability of programs. Mm-hmm. And on one hand, there's the, let's call it the sort of year-to-year, day-to-day practical sustainability, which is just how do you not get burnt out, and how do you get enough resources to go into, what kind of resource do you need, and and so on. But I have noticed a slightly different kind of problem in sustainability in a lot of institutions. I want to get your take on it, because you was one of the rare schools that really have that, long view on this. When you see, let's take LaGuardia Community College, right? Whom we both know pretty well. And Brad Einen, was really such a pioneer in that, and got portfolio started there and made a very successful program. A few years ago, he retired. And after he retired, in his case, he had built up such an amazing staff that, multiple people were able to get on and continue his legacy. And Pablo Avila is doing an amazing job at LaGuardia, and I would argue probably taking it to the next level, And that's an amazing way to think about a program like that. The sustainability, there's that year to year, how do I get the funding and the budget, etc. But there's also the, how do you survive when the key people leave? And that, still for me, in a lot of institutions, I see a lot of that, so the linchpin being, removed, and then a program can fall apart and collapse.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Well, I think that's a huge challenge and a kind of a warning to lots of institutions. A couple of things that I think about. One is really trying to make sure that whatever initiative that you're doing, in this case, we might be talking about ePortfolio, but it could be any number of initiatives. You're really not just trying to get something approved. You're trying to affect the culture of the institution, because if you can change the culture, that is the processes that the institution uses, the language that it uses, the thinking that goes around a certain area is oriented toward, in this case, ePortfolio, then if people leave, it's much more likely to be robust and stay, because you've changed the culture. So that's one thing. Another thing is, of course, the people that you hire. And I've been in my position long enough that I have all the folks who work for me, I have hired now. Mm-hmm. And I'm just so blessed to have fantastic people working for me. And then the other thing is synergy. So when you start an initiative in higher ed, it's very tempting to just focus your efforts on it alone. But sometimes you have to stop and think about how it fits with other things. So we're not just doing an ePortfolio initiative here. It's tied to general education, and it's tied to assessment, and it's tied to faculty rank and tenure, and it's tied to our study abroad program, right? So now all of our study abroad programs document what they're doing in ePortfolio. So that's that idea of synergistically connecting an initiative to other existing initiatives at the institution, because then if I retire, it's already so well ensconced in the culture of the institution that any one of a number of people could pick it up and continue it, and Lord, probably improve it after I'm gone. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and just kind of a lesson I learned from my boss, Provost Clifton Sanders. Um, he's always taking the line of, I want all the people who report to me to be able to step in and do my job
Hmm.
if I leave. And so I make sure that all the people who work for me know exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, so that they can, if they wanted to, and I left, they could step into my job and continue
Mhm.
and expand their career. But they know not just the what we're doing, but why we're doing it
Yeah.
and where it connects. That whole synergistic process.
Mhm.
I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's
No,
the way
it's
I
a
see it, Jim.
it's beautiful because I think that that's, I mean, it's a path that one has to know when they're taking on. That's kind of what it looks like, because initially it might be that you are using your charisma or maybe your know-how or maybe your, just passion in whatever it is that the initiative demands for you to do. And you happen to maybe have some, good faculty development skills, or maybe you have good relationships with people and you open some doors, you're able to get things started. But really, the success of something that can last in an institutional setting need to sort of outgrow your own charisma. It needs to go into sort of the culture, and I think that it needs to weave itself into the fabric of how things work.
Yeah,
Right.
and the other thing is that we have an amazing faculty here at
Mhm.
Salt Lake Community College, and it's not a stretch to ask them to engage in high impact practices because they're so
Mhm.
committed to student success.
Right.
The problem is, and this is, I think, a problem especially for community colleges across the country, is our teaching loads are just brutal, right? So we have a 5 and 5 teaching load. And so when you're asking faculty who are very committed to student success, can you do one more thing? And they're with you in spirit and they're with you intellectually, but it's difficult to ask people to do more when you know that they're already teaching and doing a great job teaching, but their loads are super heavy.
Hmm. So, did you feel like that load has grown after COVID?
I don't, well, I mean, concretely, no, it's the same load, but in reality, yeah. So on paper, their load is the same as it was before,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it's very hard to put your finger on. But we're living in a new world. The expectations for having courses that are extremely flexible, for instance, now because of our experience with the pandemic. And we also know from research that we've done on campus about why students don't succeed in a class. It's very often that they have very complicated lives, particularly community college students, um, economically marginalized, very busy lives. So, what can we take from the pandemic where we had to pivot immediately and be 100% flexible for students, but now we're back in the classroom, but the lives of students are very complex, and you don't want to lose that one student in your class just because you can't be flexible with them in
Hmm.
terms of deadlines, or you recorded your lecture, so now you can offer it to them online, so they didn't really miss it. That's a great thing to do, obviously, but it's just adding to the workload of faculty, and they're doing it because they know the calling to help students is great, and they're rising to that occasion. But I have to say, it's exhausting. We hear a lot from faculty that's a lot to ask for faculty, and
And what, right, and for those who are not um, teaching or may not have been teaching for a while, you don't just work a 9 to 5 as a
no.
teacher. You're paid by the course, or that's the number of credits that you are teaching. Maybe per semester or something along those lines. and that's your course load, but you do what it takes to get it done. So if it means working in the weekends, it means it's working, having office hours at odd hours because your students need it to be. That's what happens. I remember one professor that I talked to who said, "Yeah, I have my office hours from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. because
Yeah.
all my students, that's when they get off work.
Yep.
Working at a bar, they're doing, whatever. That's the only time they could possibly talk to me. That's when the children have gone to sleep and they've done, cleaning and doing laundry. That's the only time they are able to meet with me,
Yeah.
right?"
And when I teach, it's so helpful because sometimes, you get in administrator mode and you're like, yeah, let's do this and let's do that. And then, my friends and faculty will say, Dave, this is how it is. And I like, yeah, I know you're reminding me because I'm experiencing that same thing in my own one class that I teach, and you're teaching 5 classes.
Right,
Um,
right. Yeah,
so it brings me back down to earth.
yeah, yeah. And now I do think that, I mean, there's so much that you mentioned that I want to go in and talk more about. You talked a little bit about sort of the lives of the community college students, and it also feels like to me that there's a lot in it that are opportunities. And in fact, at a different episode of the Education Scholars Conversations, I had just talked to one of Salt Lake Community College's students. His name is Martin Gausin, and
Hmm.
and he's brilliant, brilliant student. And we talked a little bit about the the sort of natural amount of diverse backgrounds, everyone coming together in the community college. Almost by definition, they're just so diverse from all different, ethnic background, language background, cultural background, etc. And when he goes in and has to do a project, um, seeing all these different sort of culture melding in one place and being able to apply that and seeing, well, what if in these different people's lenses, how would this go? And I think he was studying he's studying political science and
Hmm.
international relations or something. And, but he's able to apply that and being able to just see right away, if one were to talk about a policy, how would it impact these people right here in my classroom? Right. And I had another professor whom I talked to who said, "Oh, and this is John Jay College of Criminal Justice, who said, I when I teach this, I think it's like laws in society or something, and he said, when I teach this to a non-urban, sort of environment setting, it all feels very theoretical.
Yeah.
This is how society should be structured, and these laws make sense, and this and that." But in his class in middle of Manhattan, when there are students from all 5 boroughs coming in, from all different backgrounds, he would say, "This is what this law is," and someone said, "Oh yeah, my cousin,
Yeah.
got that last week. He was arrested.
Uh,
We have to figure out what to do." And so suddenly it becomes real, like it becomes like it's not just someone else's problem. And I
yeah.
think that community college has that amazing opportunity in some ways that are sort of people don't realize and don't understand, that actually gives you a sort of this very realistic, sort of way to apply that knowledge into something practical.
Yeah. I just love our students. Salt Lake County is not as diverse as New York City, but it's surprisingly diverse. I think a lot of people don't realize how diverse Salt Lake County is. 60% of our students are first generation students. We have a lot of students who are parents who are working um, and who are struggling financially. And you're right. When I talk, and I teach political science, when I talk about politics and the Fourth Amendment and voting and civic engagement, um, the best resource in the class is not what I'm saying. I feel like it's what students bring to the class, because a
Mm.
student will pipe up and say, "Hey, I'm working on organizing my coworkers at Starbucks," or "I am working for this campaign," or "Yeah, my cousin got stopped the other day, so I have questions about the Fourth Amendment." Um, so that's just the richness, and it's completely unpredictable, right? You don't know when you go into your first class what the mix of students is going to be and what that synergy and that energy is going to be, but it's always positive. I always end a semester saying, I'm so glad I got to meet these students. And especially when you think about like the reflective pedagogy that we try to employ here in our general education program, I really get to see, as I said before, their minds working as they grapple with what I ask them to do in class. So yeah, the students are just a tremendous resource for us.
Yeah, and for each other, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I really think that, taking the same exact concept or subject or academic, subject or theory, in a community college, um, just more often than not, you can just go, yeah, I can see it so much more clearly because, like you said, someone in class can just say, oh yeah, that happened to me, right?
yeah, yeah,
Or actually, I have a counterpoint to that. It doesn't work. What you said, it doesn't work
exactly.
because in my case, guess what? I did that and it backfired, right? How do you like, I mean, then you really start to think much more deep and it becomes more personal, it becomes more like, oh, well, hold on a minute. The human lives at stake here. It's not just, what was on the books.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we teach a class, we really try to package an experience for students, and our understanding of the subject is not necessarily their understanding of the subject, nor
Hmm.
nor their experience. And so I think we have to always be open to incorporating their experiences into what we know. And it's not a one-way street at all. They
Yeah.
are learning from us, surely, but we are learning from them and they're learning from each other.
And it really takes away that model of education where so much, where there's almost like an imbalance of, I feel like for few decades we've been so heavy handed on content acquisition. It's
Yeah.
like there's a bunch of content, learn it, and that's what the exams are going to be on, all this content, and you
I'll
just
tell
have
you a
to learn
story,
it.
Jeff.
Yeah.
So I had the good fortune of being an exchange student. So I went to the University of Bonn in what was then West Germany,
Hmm.
and I remember going into my first what they called Vorlesung. So it was a lecture, and all the students sat at their wooden tables, and professor came in with his notes in a binder in front of him, and he put them out on his podium, and everybody was quiet, and he lectured for an hour, no questions from the students whatsoever. When he was done, he closed his binder, and all the students knocked on their desks, which was their way of applauding, and he walked out, and that was the entire course. And every session was exactly like that, and I thought, this is completely insane. So I'm so glad. I mean, that's not the entire model, obviously, of how education happens in Germany, but um, in terms of lecture halls, that was it. And I'm so glad that we haven't embraced that. We really try to get beyond that and engage with students and have students do things hands on in classes and engage with each other and with the faculty member. But yeah, that one experience really shaped me. It's like I don't want to ever uh, be that kind of teacher.
Well,
He was a great guy, but
yeah,
not my style of learning.
yeah. I mean, I sometimes find that, and I remember I had a very similar conversation with someone, and I, by the way, was shaped in this in a similar way. When I was a kid, I lived in Hong Kong, and it
Uh
was
huh.
like rote to the max.
Yeah.
Actually, don't even lecture. What our teachers will do is we will go into the class, all having the textbook open. They'll go turn to page 40, right? So
Yeah.
we're on page 40, and then they'll pick on one student, Jeff, read, read.
Oh, yeah.
And Jeff will read aloud the book. And it goes through the end of the chapter, and that's the end of the class.
Yeah.
That's the class. So no questions, nothing. And then the textbook has the questions and exercise at the end. That's the homework. And the homework, by the way, these questions weren't at the time, especially they weren't like critical questions. They were literally questions that you are supposed to basically lift a paragraph from the 3 pages that you read,
Yeah.
and you just need to plop that into the answer.
Hmm.
You just copy it. That's it. It was crazy.
Times have changed, haven't they?
Yeah, it has. But I remember though, like I'm shaped that way, and I remember talking to someone who had said, I don't know. I mean, have you been in a lecture that is lecture style that is so good that you come out jazzed and excited and feeling amazing? And I have been to some like that. I remember going to a lecture by a famous educator, Maxine Green. I don't know if you know her. She had
Mm-mm.
since passed, and she um, was a was just an amazing educator, and you know, every single lecture she's ever given was created new. And that very lecture that she gave, she wrote that day.
Mm.
And she had kept 50 years or 80 years of note. I mean, she was old by the time, I was able, it might have been one of her last lectures, that I was able to attend. And we knew that it was new because she talked about that day's news.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's like you couldn't fake it, basically. She's so amazing. And the production, I mean, the way she speaks was so amazing, so captivating. And I remember thinking that. And then someone said, look, if you're able to lecture like that, or if you're able to lecture much like if you imagine the type of budget and the writing and the acting and the stuff that goes into, if you were able to get Morgan Freeman to do this, or to get Obama to, like, do you see Obama had that, what is it called, National Parks series, and
Yeah.
in the on Netflix? I loved it, just listening to him talk, and the production quality was absolutely just top notch. Yeah, I could see myself learning about something like that. Not all kinds of things, but certain things like that in a very entertained, sort of highly engaged kind of way. But until you get to that kind of level, and I don't feel like that, a typical professor has that level of, just production value. It's
Yeah.
like, I mean, we're talking like major. If you are able to train yourself to be almost like a Broadway actor, maybe,
Yeah.
but really, aside from that, like it's hard to compete in my mind.
Well, I think you got to play to your strengths. I mean, some people are very effective lecturers, and I love to listen to them. Um, but many are not, and they might think they are, but they're actually not. But they would be better placed doing some other kind of pedagogy in their class that suits their personality.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think that even those that are really good lecturers, oftentimes, the lectures, I question whether that's still their best way of doing it.
Yeah.
Another actually sort of amazing experience that I had was with Sir Ken Robinson.
Hmm.
The famous TED Talk, the one that had done the most amount of TED Talk views. And I saw him in person, not at TED, but in person. He was not only an amazing, educator and a speaker. He was hilarious, like any comedian. I mean, it was
Oh,
like if
nice.
he could have sold tickets. Oh my god! But here's the thing. Um, he basically, I was at this place where he was giving a lecture, which is amazing, and he sort of gave like a 1 hour or maybe 45-minute long talk. Brilliant. And then he stayed on for another hour and a half, where
Taking
he
questions.
just sort of talked to people and just took questions and just riff. And man, that was even better. That was amazing. That was actually, some of the most amazing, authentic thing that you see him thinking and learning, and then, responding really quickly and putting things together, and then involving the people who he would talk to, and sort of almost like real life demonstrating how it was going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I think that even for someone who's a great lecturer like he was, um, he might have been even better at that in the interactive piece. And well, rest in peace. I think he passed away
Yeah.
a couple of years ago. Um, any case, I was going to let's switch, if you don't mind, switch gear a little bit, because we talked about a lot of things. One of the things that you had talked about are just issues in community colleges today.
Hmm.
We have this workload issue, and there's also this invisible kind of workload, which is, hey, look, it's the same amount of work, except that we just made it work harder and more demanding,
Yeah.
but it's the same amount of work. So it's kind of like, well, it is not when it make it harder, when it take it longer to do, and more, I have
Indeed.
to produce more. But aside from that, I'd imagine that you must see all kinds of other, both issues but also opportunities, in community college today. Seeing what the new generation of students are coming in now, what they do and what they're like. I mean, look at a student like Martin that I was talking about earlier. you know he he's not there just to be an A student. It feels like that he is there to, he's not just taking political science because everyone else is. He's there to make a dent. I would not at all be surprised a few years later he would be running for office, or or something like that, right? Because it's just like students today, it feels like that they're charged with something different. Um, Maybe that it's got a little, remind me a little bit of you, like maybe that organic grass fed, like free
Yeah.
range
Well,
um,
I hear
feel.
you hear a lot about sort of this generation of young people, and you hear a lot of negative things about this generation of young
Mhm.
people in terms of they're spoiled, they're not very ambitious, they're not very engaged, and I hear that, but I really don't believe it. I mean,
Mhm.
it's impossible for me to believe. And when you engage with students every semester, I'm just blown away by what students are doing and how they're juggling their lives with civic engagement and their jobs and their work outside of school and the excellent work that they do in school. I'm just not getting that message, that societal message that younger people today have sort of checked out. I just don't see it. They're engaged in voting rights, they're engaged in civil rights, they're protesting abuses of authority, they're fighting for climate change policies. um, I'm just seeing it everywhere that they are engaged, and nobody more so than community college students. So I hope we can dispense with that, what I think is a myth, because today's young people are just very inspiring to me. I think the failings, if there are failings, are institutionally. I mean, I look at my institution, we have the most diverse student body, and we have the least amount of state funding per student.
Mhm.
And that's wrong, frankly.
Mhm.
And our students deserve more, and we could do so much more if we had the state funding that some other institutions receive. Um, because the faculty here and the academic administrators here are just working their tails off to make great experiences for students.
This concludes part 2 of our conversation. To hear part 3, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative e-portfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for tuning in.